Good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm assuming for most of you, it's good morning. This is the Mobilization Funding Dare Capital webinar series for manufacturers. My name appears as Cole Harmonson, but he's much more handsome than I am, so don't be confused. My name's Adam Boyd. I'm with Dare Capital, joined today by Doug Arthur and Scott Peper, and I'm going to let Scott talk a little bit about himself. But for those of you attending, this is a series that we've been talking about Dare Capital and mobilization funding for a couple of months now. Since the COVID crisis hit, we've believed that there's been some opportunity for manufacturers to really thrive and come out of this pandemic a little stronger than before. And through a series of conversations, we decided to put this program together. And today we're joined by Scott Peper, CEO of Mobilization Funding, and Doug Arthur. I'm going to introduce Doug and then let Scott talk a little bit about mobilization funding. So Doug has over 30 years diverse experience in debt and equity corporate finance. Prior to joining Windsor Capital, he worked at Essex Capital Group, a corporate finance advisory, sourcing and structuring debt capital for lower middle market companies. Prior to that, he worked at the Bank of Tampa, leading the special assets group during the last recession of 08-09, and then later as the department head for commercial real estate. Earlier in his career, he held various lending positions for institutions such as Bank South, now Bank of America, and South Trust, now Wachovia. He's got an MBA from Georgia State University's Mac Robinson School of Business and a BA in economics from North Carolina Chapel Hill. So he is a Tar Heel. Scott, can you tell us a little bit about mobilization funding as we jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. Mobilization funding is a short-term commercial lender. We started in the construction space and moved into manufacturing and purchase order financing. At this point, 7 years in, we finance just about every different type of business, from engineering, industrial engineering, staffing, manufacturing, of course, commercial subcontractors and general contractors, and all kinds of other ancillary businesses that are, moving products or services from point A to point B for their customers. Where we typically fit in as a good niche for our typical customer is they have access to revenue in the form of a purchase order or contract, and they need to execute on it or could execute on it. They just don't have the cash or capital that's needed to buy either material, items from their suppliers, or pay for the labor, or both, to execute on that work. So without putting extra stress on their business. So for us, if you have dollars of revenue in a purchase order or a contract, but you need the money in real time to be able to execute on that, we're the lender for you. That's where our sweet spot is, particularly for manufacturing. So raw materials, labor, funding those items as you can execute through a work order or a purchase order. That's our sweet spot.
Great. Thanks, Scott. And we're excited to do a lot of work with Scott. He works in a chain of financing a lot of times prior to us. At Dare Capital, we work with small to mid-sized businesses who need funding, and they actually have a receivable work's been done. And so we work a lot with construction, manufacturing companies, service-based businesses who are often light on hard or physical assets that banks would look at to do some underwriting. So quick overview today. We're going to move really fast. We're scheduled to go until midpoint of the hour. So I'm going to ask these guys some questions. And then as you guys have questions, I'll be monitoring the Q&A. So if something pops up and you want to ask about it, just jump that in and I will ask Doug and Scott. So we are ready to go. So guys, obviously with the pandemic and the PPP program, that's on the top of a lot of people's minds. Scott, Doug, we were talking a little bit about this before we kicked off. What's the most recent update on loan forgiveness? And Doug, why don't we start?
I'll go ahead and take. I'll go ahead and take that one. Well, they just came out about 4 days ago with the 19th interim final rule. So we don't know if the 20th one is just around the corner, but things are getting better. Initially, it was an 8-week spend period for that. They've extended that to 24 weeks. So one of the things that I'm advising my clients is don't try to ask for forgiveness or apply for forgiveness too soon, let it run out to where 100% of your PPP money was used for payroll. They've actually improved the ratio. It had to be 75% on payroll and 25% on other before. There's 3 or 4 categories in the other. They've now dropped that back to just 60% on payroll and 40% in the other. Those relaxed standards will help with the overall forgiveness ratio that'll be calculated later. But now that we have 24 weeks, generally you can run it all through payroll. So I say take the easy road on that, and don't try to get into an argument with the government about whether this was really covered or not covered, because payroll, there's just no discussion about it whatsoever. So now we haven't really had the first run through. It takes about 60 days for the SBA to review that. So we'll know more probably August, September of our companies really getting the forgiveness that we all thought we would get. All indications are that they're going to, but as we know, they tightened up the program here and there during the period, because there were some companies that applied for PPP that probably shouldn't have. And they sort of had their amnesty program and said, hey guys, you shouldn't have done that, but go ahead and give it back. No harm, no foul. They've also come out with the guidance that if your loan's under $2 million, that they're not going to audit it. And in addition, I guess if it's under 150,000, which is really where the vast majority of them are, they're stating that they're going to automatically forgive that. But we'll see. The proof will be in the pudding. Okay.
Scott, anything to add there?
No, we're giving the same advice related to payroll. The less arguments or disputes, not argument or dispute, but the less controversy, conversations or debate you could have with a federal agency or a state agency, the better. So, if it's in payroll taxes, it's just going to be easier. And if you had a 2.5 month loan amount of payroll previous, and you now have 24 weeks to run that out, everybody should be able to utilize that for the most part and really get it 100% forgiven with the utmost ease. So that's just good advice. That's what we've been taking. We've been passing that along. I agree with Doug on the PPP forgiveness piece as far as waiting to do that. No reason, there's no urgency in that until your money's exhausted. And that's what we've been, we've collaborated aside from this as well, but that's the advice we're giving our customers.
That's great. Thank you. For someone who might be a little concerned or stressed about this, whom should they be talking to regularly to find out the latest news and updates on the PPP program?
Talk to your banker, talk to all your professional advisors. Excuse me. Accountants, they've done a great job of putting out summaries as each one of these interim final rules has come out. The attorneys are doing the same thing. So generally between the 3 of those, you ought to be able to, get some good information.
Excellent.
And outside of the banks, I would just say, look at your typical trade organizations, whether it's in this case manufacturing or any type of trade organization you might be in. They've given some good guidance and advice that you can likely trust as well.
That's great.
But just know, no matter what research you've done, even if you were proactive and did it, you would have had to have done it 19 times now to be current.
So we're going to wait for the 27th interim rule change.
Right.
Spend the money
I've laughed in the past. We felt like the minister of misinformation at times.
If you take nothing else from this webinar, I would suggest you spend all of your PPP money on payroll, and then do an analysis of how to get it forgiven at that point when you're ready. That's what I would do.
Yep.
Excellent.
Agreed.
Well, as we think about COVID-19 and the shutdown of the economy, I know some people are hesitant about this word. Some people have what we call head trash. Douglas, again, we'll start with you. Talk to us about where we are with regard to the R word, recession.
Boy, that's a big one, because the economic definition of a recession is, the 2 quarters of declining GNP. We had such a, it fell off so fast, but then it's coming back so fast. Technically, did we really go into a recession? Who knows? But what I think is going to happen, and the PPP, in my opinion, it's prolonged it. It really, the PPP was just an extension of unemployment payments. It was, we were trying to use a COVID analogy. We were trying to use social distancing and flatten the curve. The PPP was trying to flatten the curve at the unemployment office because our system just couldn't handle that.
Right.
Regardless of how much PPP went out there, we still had, more record unemployment than this country's ever seen, at least since the Great Depression in the 30s. So I think, we have June, July, August, September, October is really going to be the telling part for that. I'm talking to companies, I'm talking to bankers, they're seeing slow payments in their collection of AR. The banks did so many deferrals with their clients, they don't really know where they are. They have to stay in constant communication with them, but they don't really know if they can pay or not pay at this point because they're not asking to be paid. So, most of that burns off around September of this year. So unless they're, hoarding cash and figuring it out, I think we've got harder times ahead of us.
Okay. Scott, what are some of the things you're seeing with actual clients that you're working with in terms of, I liken this to a python eating a bowling ball, and there was a shutdown. Now the bowling ball's got to kind of work its way through. Maybe some of the indicators you're actually seeing with clients in terms of jobs won, orders coming in, and where some of that, what those indicators are.
Yeah. I wanted this webinar to be very tactical too, so people could take not just commentary, but what can we do, actionable steps. I guess the way I'll answer that question is I'll tell you exactly what we do when we're analyzing a manufacturing company and whether or not we can finance them or not. And all the factors you just mentioned are equally as important to us as we partner with someone to figure out what's going to happen next. We're thinking 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the road. So there are really a couple key things. And I start with this. If you think about, as a business owner or a manufacturing company, think about your supply chain. What are the most critical items that you need to make your goods and services? And where are they coming from? Are they in areas that are being harder impacted by the coronavirus? Are there economic environments there, regulatory environments there that are more stringent than others? For example, if you're in the middle of New York City and that's where your major supply chain comes from versus the middle of Oklahoma or middle America, there's different requirements there. There's different pain points that those supply chain owners are going to have. That's number one. Number two, who are your customers and what are you providing for them? If your main customer is if you're manufacturing for restaurants and retail or hotels, you're going to have a tougher time than if you're manufacturing for a widget for a technology company, for example. But you really, those are the key things that we're looking at. So is the AR, to Doug's point, your revenue from your customers going to come in on time in a normal fashion? Are your average days outstanding going to remain constant? Are they going to shrink or are they going to get longer? And then on the supply chain side, the items coming into your facility before you make your finished good, are they intact and where are they coming from? And then how are those two opposite ends going to impact one another to see the viability of your business? And I think the companies that can analyze that gives them great information then to make great decisions on whether they pivot a little bit here or pivot a little bit there. Most manufacturing facilities can pivot and make other products, create other demand. And those are the companies that we see are doing the best. Quickly and efficiently. And I don't mean pivoting to make face masks or shields. I'm talking pivoting, new supply chain, creating different suppliers, maybe new products that will fit new demand. All those kind of items and things are going to be really key. So I think that's the total assessment that we go under. And then from there, we decide on what we're going to do and how we can help that company.
Okay. Well, Scott, you talked about tactics, and we're going to kind of look down the road a little bit. Doug already alluded to it, but as smaller manufacturers who may not have the multiple levels of management and all the resources are trying to determine what to do, are there any external resources you would point them to, other experts that they might go to, not just from a financial position, but from market research or understanding where to pivot or where to kind of forecast the breakdowns of the supply chain that can help them think through some of the things that are going to be coming down the pike?
It's a great question. I don't know if I'm going to be qualified enough to answer that. I think it really, for me, it depends on what you're making. You know, if
Yeah.
you're,
Mhm.
for example, if you're making products that were for the restaurant or retail space, I don't think you're going to pivot and start manufacturing
Right.
for the defense department, for example. You
Right.
know, the defense and government are going to need many, many things. But what can you pivot to? You know, I don't know. I'll give you an example. We have a customer that makes a film, and that film can retain heat. And what they use it for is they put it on top of surfaces for underneath flooring so that it insulates it, but also heats it.
Okay.
Well, they're able to actually pivot that same technology can be utilized into a product that is for the government, and it's in a spot that helps. So they have a new customer, same product, but a new customer and a new
Right.
need that was created out of this, and they pivoted to that. So that would be a good place. There's plenty. They also, if you have 3D printing and your manufacturer is doing 3D printing, well, you could 3D print almost anything. So that's something I think is also important to look at. The impacts too of what your manufacturing line looks like. Do you have a lot of employees that are close together, like a finished good, and now you have to keep them 6 feet apart? But what does that do to your efficiencies on your line? Analyzing those things, as opposed to maybe a manufacturing line that does not have a lot of employees within 6 feet of one another, you're probably able to keep your efficiency and gain and produce the same amount of whatever it is that you're making. So those are some of the parameters I think you have to assess. And then from there, is there a specific resource or two that you can go to? You know, I don't know to suggest any, but I would suggest that you spend at least an hour a day reading and consuming as much information you can in and around your trade. Spend a half hour taking in general information, and not the news, spend another half hour taking in a new target, pick a target a day that you think might be something you could pivot to that is macroeconomically is becoming more important for the world to have manufactured goods for, and see if you could pivot into those areas. So do some education of yourself first and just commit to an hour a day to try to figure that out.
Outstanding. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm not going to ask either of you to forecast the future, but what are some things that manufacturers should be thinking about over the next 6 to 12 months, not 6 to 12 months with a lot of the uncertainty coming down the pike? What do they need to be thinking about financially?
Doug, you want to go first?
Well, I'll take the first stab at it. You know, going back to the supply chain, they need to be locking down their supply chain and figuring out how they have, 3 alternatives for every key variable that goes into the production process, and making sure that that's intact, and understanding, if they have to pivot from one supplier to the next and what it could mean. You know, Scott touched on the operational layout of a facility, which is extremely important. If you social distancing might be here to stay for a while. So if you're not set up that way, you've got to figure out, you might need an industrial engineer to come in and help you lay out your line a little bit differently with that, or go to multi-shift work or something like that. If they're not running 2 shifts, utilize a second shift just to cut down on the density of the people in the facility at the time. But those are going to be important, because we have to get back to full production. We have to get back to work in this country. And I think, most people want to with that. And, there's ways to do this. And I think the real opportunity is we're going to be bringing more of our supply chain, back to the U.S. If COVID has taught us anything, is that we don't need to be as dependent upon, foreign supply chains.
Doug brings up a great point, and I agree. What I would do, I'd be thinking 2 things if I was on a manufacturing company. One, as my employees start to come back, what am I offering different? What looks different today that's better for them, that's going to be more exciting? Are they coming back to the same old with just the coronavirus over the top of our heads, or is there a new look and feel to where they're coming back to? Whether it's how they're going to work, what I'm offering to them, what excites them, what's going to be interesting, what new stuff we're going to be able to do now because the coronavirus is there, not what pain points I'm going to have because the coronavirus came, but what new and exciting things are going to be there. I think you should be looking at the products that are manufactured overseas right now, and how do I get in touch with some of those businesses to figure out how I can make those products here in the U.S., which there isn't a company that is making things over in China or overseas right now that wouldn't much rather have them made here in the United States. It's just purely cost. So maybe you can't do it as less expensively as in China. How can you do it at a compelling offer that could maybe work? And maybe you can gain some volume and efficiencies. I'd be looking at some products like that. Some of your commodity items. Maybe it's, I have someone who's selling batteries into Home Depot. Most of those batteries are made in China. They're trying to find someone here in the United States that could make those same batteries versus going to Vietnam or Thailand. I don't know if that's a legitimate problem, but that's a big problem. There's tens and tens of millions of dollars of that being sold just by that one business, just into Home Depot, for example. So
Yeah.
there's products like that or other commodities that if you can figure out a way to make and manufacture them here at a good price point, that I think all sides, both retail, in the middle, and manufacturing, are willing to spend a little bit more to have a more controlled supply chain here in the U.S.
That's great. That's great.
I would agree with that.
What do you, Doug, we'll start with you. Companies, again, you don't have a crystal ball. We don't know how many more shutdowns we're going to go through, second waves, third waves, how it's going to hit people and impact business. What are some of the things that manufacturing companies can and should be thinking about right now regarding their cash and their financials? You talked about shoring up the supply chain, but just in terms of financial management, what are some things they need to be considering?
Well, they need to communicate with their payables, and if they have to go on any payment plans, get that set up ahead of time. Cash is going to be king, so they need to figure out how to accumulate and hoard cash. You can't starve your vendors, but you need to have the conversation with them of what they can live with. So that way, how long you can stay in business. You need to calculate your burn rate, which is basically the amount of cash it takes for you to take whatever widget it is that you bring in the front door to process it and send it out the back door, and then collect. You need to understand your cash cycle and the length of your cash cycle, which goes into the collection of the AR as well. The cash cycle being the production period, the sales period, and then the collection period. If there are ways to improve the collection period, they need to look at that. You need to consider offering discounts if you have enough margin in your product to get your receivables collected earlier or quicker. Those are just a few of the key things that I think would help bolster the cash position. Because once you have that, then you know how long you can operate. And then if an opportunistic situation arises, you can actually take advantage of that as well.
That's great. Scott, what would you like your thoughts on this?
Again, I would figure cash, the companies that are in the best cash situation are the companies that are going to have the most to advantage in this environment. There's a lot of opportunities out there. A lot of them will be hard to take without some cash. So I think you need to keep your close companies tight, do what Doug said, and make sure they're paid. One thing I would add to that is if you do have some big capital expenditures that you were planning for, maybe even committed to, I would consider unwinding out of some of those right now and just sit on the sidelines and wait a little bit. This might not be the time for a big capital expenditure, even if there's a penalty associated to it. For example, maybe there's a 5% penalty on a $100,000 piece of equipment you were going to buy. You might be better off burning that $5,000 and keeping your $95,000 sitting around than putting that $100,000 piece of equipment in there. Just food for thought, things like that. And I'm not saying to do that permanently, but I'm saying to just assess those decisions. And also, all those things are dependent on your current business. Is that you're only 100,000? What is your current cash position? What opportunities do you have? Is that machine that you're buying going to enable you to take advantage of one of those opportunities I was telling you earlier in this conversation to uncover? Those are all factors that would weigh into that decision. But big picture wise, the more cash you have on hand to take advantage of opportunities or create them for yourself is the most important thing that you should probably be doing right now.
One thing I'd like to add there, let's not forget about the SBA's EIDL program. If your business, if you think you've been economically damaged, you can fill out the application for that. The SBA decides how much money they're going to lend you, and it's a loan. It's not forgiven at all, but it's 30-year money. It's like having, you know, permanent capital put into your business at a very low interest rate of 3.75%. You know, that's a great kind of safety net.
Yeah, I'll add to that. As I've talked to many business owners about the EIDL loan, and some of the things that they'll say to me is, you know what, I don't like that. I don't want to owe the government money. I'd rather just go find friends or family that would want to take some equity, or I'll go find some friends or family money. And I always tell them, you know what, listen, there is no cheaper money in the earth than taking the EIDL money right now. Number one, it's 30 years, it's 3% and change. It's like a great capital infusion.
Yeah.
You don't even have to make payments on it for the first 12 months. I mean, that is a no-brainer to do just for any reason. Even if you held on to it for a year and then paid the entire thing back at the end, just to have that cash there for any opportunities that come about, I would apply and get that money and take that money now, hold it, use it in the right places, items, things like we've been talking about today already. And again, in a year from now, if your whole business, the whole world's back to normal and your business is back to normal and you don't need that money, then just pay it off.
Yeah, that's great.
That's a big application too. Speaking of the SBA, their fifth, sixth, seventh, 10th version of that application got better and better and better. The first one might have taken you 6 hours to fill out, and now it's probably 15 minutes.
That's great. That's improvement. In terms of opportunities that you talked, Scott, about finding new things you can make, but what are you seeing or thinking about if you're a manufacturer in terms of where they can be opportunistic? Maybe it's an acquisition, maybe it's a joint venture with someone who has a similar customer base. Anything like that those who've been able to put themselves in a good cash position should be thinking about? And I'll start with you, Doug.
Yeah, you know, the first place to look at is the supply chain, and see if it makes sense to buy one of your suppliers, and kind of you know, vertically integrate backwards from there. And that way you have secured the key ingredient to what you need. You know, if it makes sense to do that. You know, that's what I would look at first. As far as, you know, vertically integrating the other way, probably, you know, not so much. You're not looking to buy customers or anything of that nature. But you know, for manufacturers, it really is. It's all about supply chain management.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Scott, any thoughts you have?
I would agree with Doug. I would definitely look at buying through my supply chain. I'll call it down. I wouldn't be so aggressive buying up the chain right now. There's just too much uncertainty. What does that customer base look like? I mean, your best assessment could be whatever they've been doing. And obviously what they've been doing is going to be hard to predict what they are going to do right now in this current environment.
Right.
As far as new opportunities, you know, maybe it is 3D printing. I mean, maybe you find a 3D printer and you start creating something new with a line that you have or extra space, a widget. You know, it's just, there's so many different things to manufacture, whether you're manufacturing food lines versus finished goods versus paper supply. I mean, it could all depend on what your company's doing already, as to what your opportunities could be. It really does. It's so specific on what you make and what your customer base is. It's hard to say.
That's good. I'm going to give us a minute or so to see if any questions come in from the audience. I know we've got a lot of folks who are in the lending space, whether traditional banks or those in commercial finance. Any thoughts you have for those in commercial finance or bankers who are advising or working with manufacturers? Any thoughts you would give them? You guys have a lot of experience in this space. Any thoughts you would give them to share with their customers, clients?
Just stay in constant communication. Ask them to map out their cash cycle and see if it's all turning quicker, slower, or about the same than it was before. Yeah. And if it's slower, find out where, and then kind of drill down on that to see how you can improve that.
Okay. Yeah. Scott, what about you?
I would reach out and be opening up about what I can do to help them currently. You know, like, you know, it's going to be tough situations. I think a lot of companies, bankers, just people in general are going to think first about how can I protect myself? And you're going to convey that then to the manufacturing company and probably
Yeah.
close some of the doors and
Oh, wow.
probably limit conversations or information that you would know. If I was in that situation, and when I am, I want to know, hey, listen, like this is going to be this, maybe this is real bad. So we're in this together. It's real bad.
Yeah.
Let's figure out how to manage the bad together. We don't need to be or going to be adverse to one another. So how do we make this the best possible? Let's just lay all the cards on the table. Tell me where you're at, what you're doing, how you're doing it. Let me figure out how I can help you. There's a million opportunities out there, whether it's EIDL money, PPP money, or other or maybe it's some program the bank has. Maybe it's, forbearance agreements combined with the EIDL. If you can get real information and have real collective ideas and there's an open communication, and you only do that by trusting one another and actually figuring out how you can help each other,
Yeah.
I would be having those type of conversations more than I would be worrying about just myself.
Okay.
Yeah. And the bank, the banks have done a great job with deferments and allowing people to defer payments for a period of time. And I don't think the bank examiners have really weighed in yet of how they're going to do, monitor the banks. But I'm sure there's going to be a new round of stress tests coming forward very, very soon to make sure that the banks haven't swept these problems under the carpet at this point. So it'll be interesting to see if bank examiners, kind of up their game here in the fall.
Yeah, that's good.
And when that does happen, it's the companies, at least in my view, the companies that have been open and communicative with the banker and they've told the story and there's no surprises, those are the companies that are going to have the most leeway, because there's going to be plenty of companies that aren't behaving that way, and they'll be the ones that are tough. The bankers are going to be tougher on, or the auditors, etc. But if you're open and communicating and telling what you can do and doing what you say, regardless of how bad you may think it is, but you do what you say you can do and you stick to it, those companies are going to have a ton of runway, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah. So, Scott, one of the things I'm hearing is communicate, whether you're the lender or you're the one receiving the funds in the manufacturing. You've just got to be talking openly and honestly right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, we're set to run here till about 10:30. But any last thoughts you guys have for those listening, for those watching, and if any questions come in, we'll take those. But this has been really phenomenal information. Just if you're a manufacturer, what are the 2 to 3 things you would say, hey, and Doug, I know you're going to say something about the supply chain, but that you guys are just going to hammer home, be thinking about this. This is the thing to be thinking about.
I think there's tremendous opportunity in this environment, as any time of major change. Sometimes there's major changes and shifts because of super negative things that created, and sometimes it's really super positive things. This happens to be fairly negative, for the most part. It can be. But there's a lot of folks out there right now that are thriving and doing all kinds of great new things right now because of this problem. Think about how you can get on that side of it. Maybe that's a minor shift for your business. Maybe it's a major shift for your business. But take this time right now and invest in yourself, educate yourself, figure out where your business can pivot to, look at those capabilities, rewatch this webinar, think about some of the things we thought we gave you just to think about, and be surprised at what comes to you. You're a smart person. You've been in business long enough. You have a company. You'll create, when you put your mind to it and to start thinking about what you can do, you're going to think of and find a lot of opportunities, I believe. So I would focus on that. That would be my biggest takeaway. Figure out how you can pivot where you can add a lot of value and solve a problem with your current business. And maybe that's in the similar business, or maybe it's in a completely different type of customer base. But if you can find a problem that you could solve, you can add a tremendous amount of value and thrive in this environment.
Excellent. And just for
that was really well said, Scott.
Yeah, go ahead.
Talk about everything I was going to say. The only thing I would say is just try to keep the faith, maintain a positive attitude with it all, because we are all, going through this together. There's an enormous amount of stress to be shared, and the better attitude that we can have, the better we will all, get through this. And then going back to what you had mentioned, Adam, the communication is absolutely paramount.
Okay.
Yeah, look, Doug makes a great point too, is we didn't create it. Usually you can be in these kind of bad situations and you're sort of there by yourself. Everybody's dealing with this in just different ways. It's none of this is a self-induced problem. I mean, it was created completely outside of your capability. It wasn't like you made a left when you should have made a right and created this huge problem for yourself. It sort of just got thrown on top of us like a bad weather storm. So
Yeah.
don't feel bad about it. Figure out how you can, thrive in it. That's first and foremost. I think keep your head up.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Doug and Scott for being here. We are going to circulate the information, contact information for these guys. If you've got more questions you want to take offline, if there's something you want to engage these guys on, I'll be sending an email out shortly. Also, July 22nd, we're going to be talking about really preparing for the future operationally. We've got Stephen Shang, who's the CEO of Falcon Structures. He's going to be joining us along with Robert Conley, who initially invested in job shop manufacturers, and then he ran a company called Crash Rescue and recently ran BagCorp. So they're going to be our guests in July, and we'd hope you'd attend. Bring your friends, bring those who've attended today. And if you got any questions, feedback, feel free to send us that. We want to make this as impactful and as meaningful for you as possible. So again, Scott, Doug, thanks for your time, and we'll go from there. All right. Thank you guys.
Thank you. Appreciate
All right,
it.
my pleasure.